All right, we're back online again, and this time we want to talk about some of the photographers and some of the models who made physique photography what it is today. And they started after World War II, 1945, and they come up to about 1990 when the industry just went bonkers and it's just all down and dirty, and I don't really much care for it. We're talking about physique photography where the body was emphasized, not the dick. Not that the dick wasn't important, but it is the body that Jay Bryan and some of the other photographers would concentrate more on. And Jay Bryan, is I think, the most important physique photographer in the 60s that we can look back on today. And he was important because he was well known, he was successful, and he was running a whorehouse in addition to doing the photography and selling the photos. And you could come to San Francisco to Jay's little whorehouse, and you could buy a butt or buy some guy's butt for an hour, 2 hours, all night, for a day, a week. And it got very expensive when you got into the days and weeks, but he was running a whorehouse in San Francisco. And he had the best little male whorehouse you could find. He was well known, and he had the advantage of the police kept hands off him for odd reason that I don't really know. Jay Bryan photographed my brother, and he was my brother's lover. And when Jay Bryan started to have problems, he was tipped off, and he would go to Hawaii and just hang out and get out of the hot San Francisco nights situation where he might have been ready to go to jail. And just he never really did go to jail, and he was probably the most pushy of all the photographers in terms of getting things done. What did you know about Jay?
Well, I know that he started back in the early 60s as a physique photographer, and he photographed guys in jock straps, no nudes. And then in the late 60s, he started Golden Boys, and was the editor of Golden Boys, a very influential three-quarter size magazine, published here in San Francisco, with mostly San Francisco or Western models. But he also published photographers from all over the United States. And he did very well with that. In addition to that, he had the Laurel Theater. Remember the Laurel Theater? Yes. He made movies. 7 in a Barn is one of his movies. I don't know. He never had any money in the jumping. Remember the Jumping Frog?
I don't think so.
That was right next to the Laurel Theater.
I don't think so. I think he was primarily the Laurel Theater.
Laurel Theater.
That was it.
Yeah, that was a place to go on Sunday. You go to the Jumping Frog. They served a brunch, and then you went to. You also could go to the Laurel Theater and watch his movies.
Tell me a little bit more about the Jumping Frog, because you will inform me. I don't know. Didn't know about the Jumping Frog.
Well, it was just like, it was like one of the Folsom Street bars. It was just a very popular place to go on the weekends. There was all along Polk Street. This was on Polk Street. The Laurel Theater was just past California on Polk. But how many bars were there on Polk Street? There were probably a dozen.
Dozens, yes.
Yeah.
We're sure.
So Jay did all that, was very successful, particularly with the movies. He put them out on videotape finally, and then it all stopped. You remember? It kind of stopped. Yeah. And there was a hiatus maybe of 8 or 10 years, and then he came out with new Golden Boys.
That's when he was hiding out in Hawaii, because he was hot, and they had finally decided that they were going to bust him, but he had somebody who was in the know, and they tipped him off. So Jay Bryan and my brother, who was my brother Michael, who was Jay Bryan's lover, his darkroom guy, his gopher, Michael did all sorts of work with Jay and kept him together for a while. He would have fallen in the alcoholic gutter if Michael had not been there, because he just had a terrible, terrible drinking problem. He mostly drank wine, didn't really go for the hard stuff, but he drank so much of it, he would be drunk by noon. Yeah. And he just couldn't get anything done. He couldn't get his darkroom work done. He couldn't get his models ready to go for that night. And then if somebody didn't show up who was working out of Jay's little whorehouse, he'd become very angry and upset and drink a little more. Yeah. So he was kind of a contradiction in terms, but he was the one that pushed it. He would put his work out there, And he said, come and get me to the police.
Yeah.
And eventually they did, and that's where he headed to Hawaii.
Well, from the way we're talking, it sounds like all he did is work. Actually, why don't you tell us a little bit about the nude beach scenes on the weekends?
Yes.
Because apparently, Claude, did you know Claude
Oh, yeah,
Schwab?
sure, yes. Claude and Jay Bryan got to be neighbors towards the end, and they lived right next to each other. Jay Bryan had great respect for Claude. Claude was a chemist who worked on the Manhattan Project during World War II, which made the atomic bomb. And he was a very, very nice man. And he was very, very gay and into Jay Bryan stuff. And he was the one that kept Jay Bryan going. They lived right at 36 and 35. Oh, I can't think of the street. Oh, don't get old. You forget things that I know very, very well. But Jay Bryan and Claude worked together on a lot of projects towards the end of Jay Bryan's productivity. And Jay Bryan liked and respected Claude. And Claude was a man behind the scenes. He didn't really want to get out there, didn't want his name. Jay Bryan was just the opposite. He wanted Jay Bryan on everything. He wanted you to know that this was Calpran or this was Jay Bryan. He had his name and stamp on everything, Claude on nothing.
Well, Claude was a photo collector. He collected photos. And he started in 1925 working for Barton Horvath back in New York. This guy, Barton Horvath, would solicited photographs from amateur photographs from all over the country. And when people would send it to him, Claude would go in and make copies of these photographs so that Horvath could sell them. And he also got copies for himself. And that's how he started to build this photo collection, that he had a big photo collection. So he'd been in the business for a long time and just loved photography, loved physique photography. So that means, I think, didn't you tell me that he would go down to the nude beaches with you guys?
We all did. My brother and Claude.
And wasn't Claude really crazy about your brother?
Oh yes, everybody was. My brother, I was crazy about my brother. And we don't say incest at our house because it's kind of a naughty word, but there lays the truth.
Yeah.
So my brother was the most fabulous young man you ever saw in your life. I am the oldest and he is the youngest. And we grew up together, and we used to have to sleep together, and of course I didn't do anything because he was way too young. And he would sleep in the bed with me, and he would curl up and bang his head on my stomach. Get away, Michael, get away. You're making it hard to sleep. You're using my stomach as a pillow. And that's not how it's supposed to work. So Michael would crawl under the bed, and he would sleep under the bed. And Michael was just the best young brother. For a gay guy who liked young guys, I was so fortunate to have a beautiful young brother like Michael. And quite sadly, the thing that just tears me apart to this day, Michael died of AIDS. He was one of the first to go, and he sacrificed his body and did not, he experimented with all the drugs for the doctors so they could find a cure.
I think that's when I first met you, when you were coming over here to see him in the hospital.
Yes.
Remember that?
I think so too.
Yeah.
And he was the best young brother. I miss him so much. I wish he were here. And Michael, wherever you are, thank you. You are a fabulous young man. And I'm going to do show some of his pictures, and Jack and I are going to try to get some of Michael's pictures up. He was a model for me. He did photography. He did my GoPro work. He did anything and everything. And a nice, friendly guy, and of course Claude. Everybody with met Michael was in love with him.
Claude made some movies of these excursions, didn't he?
There is a movie of us down at the nude beach, and we had what we called our 4 o'clock Dogpile, where somebody would blow a whistle as there was a queue. And at that time, at 4 o'clock, all the guys were romping up and down the nude beach, almost exclusively male, and the cue would go off, whatever it was, a whistle or something, and everybody would run down and jump in a dog pile. All these naked guys would jump in a dog pile and squirm around with people looking and wondering, what are they doing? Well, it's 4 o'clock, and we have to have our little dog pile at the beach. And this was just a ritual. every Saturday at 4 o'clock, you could see a dog pile at the nude beach of naked guys, naked bodies. There were some older guys, but the older guys couldn't take the pushing and shoving and the laying on top of each other. So it was mostly younger, good-looking guys in the pile, and it was a lot of fun. And Claude did some photography of it, and there somewhere somebody has the.
Well, didn't you? I thought that we got them all, and I gave you some. Didn't you send them to Tim in Vermont? Didn't he make transfers?
Yes. So they're going to be on Tim's site,
Right.
and we want to plug Tim, but we'll do that at a little bit later point. Tim is currently the vintage person who puts all vintage stuff up, including these videos that you're talking about, and we will make known how to contact him, how to see them. He has a very inexpensive site. It's like $6 a month for $1 million worth of photography.
Really? That's
It's
good.
just fabulous. You will get your $6 worth in the first 2 hours that you look at it.
Right.
He just does a terrific job.
Yeah.
Now, did we cover how the models advertised in here?
I don't know. Did we say that?
Let's do it again, just in case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The models, if they wanted to be known, advertised in the Berkeley Barb. There were some other papers, and the Berkeley Barb is not gay-oriented. It is everybody-oriented.
Well, it was political, first of all.
Yes, that's
leftist political, and then the way they stayed in business was they sold these ads.
Yes, they
in
sold
the back,
these
sex
ads.
ads in the back, and that dichotomy was always a strain.
Yes. And predominantly gay, comparatively speaking, the number of gays and the number of straight people, it was about 50-50 in terms of number of ads, but there were a lot more straight people who could have made ads, but the gay people and the gay clientele was what kept the Berkeley Barb going. And Max Shearer, who is the founder and the publisher
The editor, yes.
and the editor of the Berkeley Barb, lived off of the gay advertising dollar that he got from there. And he was straight, unfortunately, and he was an SOB to deal with, and he didn't always get, because I had to run over with Jay's ads, and if I was a minute late, no, you're too late. And sometimes you got caught in traffic. Most of the time we got the ads in, and most of the time it worked out. But he was a very difficult person to work with, and I did not enjoy Max at all. And I'm not surprised he went out of business, because he went out of business a little sooner than he might have, simply because he had such a harsh attitude towards people. They didn't want to buy into what he was doing, even though it was a very important service. Even though he was breaking ground, he did things in such a crude way that it just turned people off. Okay, did we do the lawn book yet?
Well, we
Yes.
mentioned Lon in connection with Dave Martin.
Well, talk about one.
Yeah, let's talk. You know more about lawn than I do.
Sure, Lon was started in New York. He was influenced by another photographer by the name of Gebe, a 30s photographer, and he started his own
He had a
business.
store in New York, didn't he?
He had Bob Anthony was the first person who worked there.
Yeah, yes. And he would photograph right out. You could come into his store, and you could have your picture taken right there in his store, in the back room, not in the
Yes.
front of it, but
Yes, you sure could. So anyway, he started back there and had a thriving business. There was they used to have, he and his friends Gabe and other photographers would have Saturday afternoon get-togethers. They'd all get together, and they one of his models would pose for them. And who's that artist that we're going to talk about?
James Bidgood,
No, not Good.
Tom Mathema.
No, the other one. The one that was a black and white that you didn't. It's all black and white.
Oh,
You said
I
you
didn't
don't
like it.
You don't think of him in black and white.
Acquaintance.
Acquaintance was there. Acquaintance. If you see a lawn photograph and there's a hand-drawn fig leaf on it, Acquaintance drew those. And he came to these Saturday afternoon get-togethers. They'd have a model. The model would pose, go through all his poses with the jockstrap on, and then at the end he would take his jockstrap off, and the guys that were gathered there would critique his meat.
Mine's bigger than yours.
So it was it was funny. Bob Miser used to have Saturday evening get-togethers down in L.A., and he would show to whoever was interested. Usually there was a crowd of 25 or so people. He would show all the work that he had done that week to these guys, and they would, talk about it and talk about whether it was good or this model or that model, and how do you meet them, and all. It was a social get-together.
Los Angeles had their own newspaper, like the Berkeley Bard,
right? What
called
was
the
it?
Freep.
Oh,
Free
really?
Press.
Oh, Free Press. Yeah, I
Yes.
remember the Free Press.
And this is the Bard. We don't have any Free Press.
I don't have any Free Press, no.
And it was predominantly Los Angeles, and you could subscribe, and they would send it to you. And
Yeah.
I got my Free first through the mail, but eventually it began to be seen in the bookstores. And
Yeah.
Lisa Long would have the Freep here,
yes.
and you could get it over the counter.
Yes.
And that's where you got models, was in the Los Angeles Free Press. Freep.
Right, yeah.
You can't emphasize enough, this is part of the breakthrough, the ability to communicate. You didn't have computers, you didn't have Facebook or other ways of communicating back then. You did so by running ads in the papers. That was the way models made themselves known.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
And did we talk about Lon?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
talked
you
about
just
Lon.
talked about
Miser.
Lon.
We talked about Miser.
Let's talk about James Bidgood,
Okay.
because I like James Bidgood because he takes this to another level. He tells a story, a very unique and very interesting story, as the models are doing their posing and making pictures. And this depicts the book he has here, which is all the photos, and you can see the costumes that they have on.
Yep.
That it gives you the idea that he was telling a story on film with good-looking young guys. And this is in the 60s too. And it was not normal, but his is high quality. His work has stood the test of time.
It's so strange because he did this in his apartment,
Yeah.
and he made all these sets, and I guess
Yes.
he borrowed the costumes.
Yeah.
It's really extraordinary.
And this is one of my favorites because the color. I love color. As we talked about Quaintance, I don't think Quaintance should be seen in black and white, because Quaintance was a color artist.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
And let's see here. And there are a couple of guys that got to be famous out of the Bidgood selection.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, he was very kind of I don't know, candy-coated.
Yes. Now let's talk about some of the he-men and the rugged guys,
Okay.
and that would be Colt
Yeah.
predominantly.
Well,
And
Colt started out in New York.
why don't you tell more, because you know more about them than I do, and I'll hold up the pictures.
He started out in New York with Luger was his studio. He was an artist. He always wanted to be an illustrator, but that wasn't viable by the time he came on the scene. So he drew kind of very high quality cartoonish men.
And he took a lot of pictures too.
Then he started taking pictures. Yeah. And eventually, the studio was called Luger, and then it was changed to Colt. He moved out here and moved down to Studio City, and we had a thriving business until he retired. He just died a week or so ago.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, This is June. He died in middle of May, 2017.
And he had to be well into his 80s too.
He's 85.
Yeah.
Lived in Palm Springs.
But he's very, very important because he was not the twink. Most of the guys, the photographers, did twink. Young, 20-something guys who would be photographed, and then they would go into the twink magazines. And we're getting the sign again, so let me hold up the Tom of Finland book too.
Okay.
Because he is artist superb. I thought Tom of Finland's work, and he came over from Finland too, didn't he? And then started drawing. All his work was here.
Yeah, well, Bob Miser's the first one to publish him
And his work...
in Physique Pictorial.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And his work is just
His work is great.
superb.
And
We're going to wrap it up. And this is one person we recommend if you want to buy, if you like art, get a Tom of Finland book. I thought he was the best.
he's the best, and the second best supposedly is Rex,
Yes.
according to Rex.
And we're done.